I want to turn now to Calvin Dark, who is a communication strategist and analyst. And Calvin, thanks for being with us. Donald Trump has called for protest if he is arrested. Based on what happened on January 6th, when there was only that cryptic message, "Come to Washington, it will be wild," what is your take on that call for protest?
Hey, good evening. I think that that's probably the most serious thing that we know for sure. You know, there have been rumors started by former President Trump that he would be arrested. People are speculating about what an indictment could look like. But one thing we know for sure is his language was reminiscent of January 6th, protest, take our country back. And one of the things that really struck me when I saw it over the weekend was understanding what happened on January the 6th. If he wanted to make sure that that didn't happen again, he could have said peacefully, and he didn't. So I think that tells us a lot.
Calvin, after January 6th, in many of the trials, it has come up now, including in testimony before Capitol Hill, that many of the people who came to Washington on January 6th believed that they were duped, that they were political pawns. What should be the response this time, should anybody decide to take up the former president's calls for protest? What should the government do?
Well, I think that the government, from what I've seen, is doing the first and most important thing, and that is preparing, security for whatever event might happen, wherever, be it in New York, in Florida, or in Washington. And I think that those who support him and those who don't believe this prosecution or prosecution they expect to come is fair, there are ways to protest, to do it in a way that doesn't put anybody's life in danger or takes away from our institutions. Because let's remember here, he hasn't been prosecuted yet. He hasn't even been indicted yet. So I think that needs to happen first so people can know what, if anything, they need to protest.
House Republicans are downplaying any potential protest. I want you to listen to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
It doesn't matter what side of the issue you're on. It doesn't matter if this was President Trump or if this was a Democrat. It should be equal justice in America. And stop going after people because you have political differences.
Former President Mike Pence calling the case politically charged, saying it's a politically charged prosecution. This is a man who just last week at the Gridiron Dinner said that history will judge the former president because he threatened his life and the life of his family. How do you square that circle?
Well, I saw former Vice President Pence's interview, and I'm still trying to square that circle. What I could gather, after looking at it a couple of times, is he was trying to do three things. One was he was trying to use this potential indictment prosecution to his political advantage, whatever his future in politics may be if he runs in 2024. Second thing, he was trying to do so in a way that doesn't alienate supporters of President Trump. And the third thing that he was trying to do is paint this as, I believe he said, politically charged, whatever that means, prosecution. So he was trying to thread several needles there, and I don't really know exactly if it hit all the audiences correctly because it just really sounded like he was trying to take all sides of the issue.
Calvin, this case is being criticized as being weak, and yet Donald Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, is now one of the key witnesses. Cohen went to prison. Wouldn't Donald Trump have had a stronger argument if, after Cohen was convicted, he, as president, commuted his sentence? Because after all, then it was a federal crime. And ironically, when Cohen tried to write his book, he wound up being sent back to prison.
Exactly. A lot of folks have been talking about the fact that there are multiple investigations happening in multiple jurisdictions, and people wonder if this is the strongest case. I'm not an attorney, so I can't really speak to how strong this case is. But what I do know is that it must be airtight if there's an indictment, because if there was to be an indictment and a prosecution, and it was to fail or was to have be based on flimsy evidence, that's going to really taint in the public side the other potential prosecutions and investigations that are going on. And I do think the Michael Cohen factor is important because, he is very willingly in court and on TV talking about what he believes the former president may have done. But given the fact of, his conviction and everything that happened after it, that really weighs on his credibility.
Calvin, is politics the right lens to look at this? Because a lot of people are looking at this through a political lens, but the bottom line is New York could actually be considered the graveyard of politicians. The most recent example, Governor Andrew Cuomo for sexual misconduct. Before that, Governor Eliot Spitzer for his involvement with a prostitute, Anthony Weiner for sexting, and Rudy Giuliani being investigated for his role in Georgia and January 6. He was America's mayor. Is this a case of politics, or are the chickens coming home to roost?
I think this is a case of an elected DA is pursuing a case that, I think the office, the holder before him did, the federal government decided not to. He is pursuing this from a legal standpoint. But I think it's going to be impossible for the public to look at this from a non-political lens, because these are political actors, a former president of the United States. This would be unprecedented. So what I hope is that in New York or wherever there are investigations going on, that those folks would keep the legal lens on, and that those of us not in the legal world would look at it, are going to look at it politically, but that we shouldn't make that distort what's happening. If it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong.
Calvin Dark in New York. Calvin, thanks for being with us this evening.
Thank you.